Testing. Testing.
Hey guys.
All right. So here's the deal. It's late December. It's
Very late
morning,
December.
and Miss Firehammer and I are about ready to put together a PowerPoint for your weekend pleasure. So,
It's
um,
essentially going to be the best
wow. All right. Well, we're already 30 seconds into this, and that's 30 seconds of your life you're not going to get back. So let's roll. All right. So, age of exploration. And you guys know this stuff. You've all heard it. You probably did some projects on it in like 5th grade.
I mean, you've been learning about Christopher Columbus since you went to school and preschool.
Yeah, but did you really learn about him? The guy's a
No.
monster.
Terrible.
And he's got a national holiday after him. That's crap. Seriously. The guy is responsible for millions of deaths and disease and all the rest. And he gets a holiday. And then the state of Arizona doesn't want to do Dr. Martin Luther King Day. That's crap.
That's weird.
Anyways, all right. You got a learning target here.
Identify the 3 main reasons that Europeans began exploring the Earth's oceans. So those 3 main reasons you should look at are religion, spices, and for profit.
All right, and so this is where you pause this thing because I'm not waiting around for you to write this learning target down, but you do need to put this in your learning target packet and answer it, all right? And I'm out. Not really, I'm still here, but
So I put this picture in here, just kind of, it gives you a nice overview of all these different people that we're going to talk about. You can see all of their routes that people started to do as we start this age of exploration.
and really all this whole thing is that from about 1500, by like mid 1400s, all the way through
Mid 1600s, so close to the early 1700s.
Europeans are going to start exploring the world, and it's going to be this great race for land and profit and spices and money and all the rest. So here we go.
Right, so there are a couple different motives and reasons behind why the European countries actually decided to go into this age of exploration. First of all, spices. And today we don't really think of spices as this cool thing. You go to the grocery store, there's this whole aisle, and you see all these cool spices. But back then, people didn't have all these spices, and their food sucked. Like, you ate dinner and you just didn't want to eat dinner because food sucked. You didn't have pepper, you didn't have salt, you didn't have like paprika, all those cool spices. And the people who did were super rich because they could pay for them because they were pretty expensive at this time. And they also helped preserve food. And the people who controlled these spices, well, they were the Muslims over there in that Muslim empire we learned about, and also those new Italian city-states. That's why I got those pictures of those nice little Medici family with their cool little collars and fancy clothes.
Big time.
So the other European nations like Great Britain, Spain, Portugal were like, hey, we really need these spices and we want them to be a lot cheaper. So we kind of want to find a way around these Muslims and around these Italians. And so they start building ships and they start thinking, what's the best way that we can go around the Muslim empire? Maybe let's try to go around like Africa, but we don't have ships that are great enough to do that. So they started to improve their shipbuilding, improve their sailing. It's got a nice picture of some spices up there and also of the new ships they started to build that actually were able to go out into the ocean and have long voyages.
That is a nice picture of spices, by the way. That is very nice, very nice. So we get to Portugal, and they are going to be the kind of leaders getting into from the Atlantic Ocean there into the Indian Ocean. And it's so important that right now you're going to see Europe, who was behind the rest of the world for so long because of the Middle Ages and the dark times, the lack of learning, inventions, and all the rest, that this is a crazy thing. But Europe, within a century, is going to leap ahead of the world and pretty much take over it. And one of the reasons why is because of this intense competition between like Portugal and Spain, and England and France. And that competition drove them to get better and better and better and better because they saw the amount of wealth that was available. They could just get out there and seize it before the others did. So, Portugal, like I said, with a Portuguese accent. I don't know if that is or not, but go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say Portugal, if you don't know, is right up next to Spain. And why it's kind of the first country to do this is because, as you can see, a lot of it faces the ocean. And this guy, Henry the Navigator, he's a prince, one of the third sons of the king. So obviously, he's probably not going to become king. He starts thinking, let's build ships. Let's go start exploring islands outside of Portugal. And he's like an avid adventurer, gathers scientists, gathers map makers. He wants to explore Africa. And he's like the driving force behind how Portugal is the first person to start this age of exploration. And then, unfortunately, he dies 1460 before really we get into this age of exploration. But others finish his work. The first one is Bartholomew Diaz, who went down and he rounded the southern tip of Africa, which if you've like looked at the map, that's like a really long way from Portugal all the way to the southern tip of Africa. And actually, the southern tip of Africa has really terrible storms. So this is a pretty like great accomplishment. And then in 1497, we have Vasco da Gama, who sails around that southern tip of Africa, keeps going, and goes all the way to India. So now Portugal has finally found a way to get around those Muslims and get to India where all of those cool spices are.
Diaz gets them around the tip of Africa, and then Da Gama gets to India. And I think it's important to note. So if you look at like 1488 and 1497 as those dates, just to put it in perspective, Miss Firehammer, Columbus sailed the ocean blue
In 1492.
So right in between there. So it was so hard to get around Africa and get to India. And you would think, like, just paddle your boat off the shore of Africa and you'll be fine, right? But it was that tricky. Now, I don't claim to be a sailor, but to understand that you had to get around Africa and over to India was a difficult thing, so much so that Columbus took off and made it to the New World before Da Gama was able to get to India. Just a little perspective.
We got Diaz on the left, Gama on the right, and their lovely, cool clothes.
Sweet beard there.
Yep.
Nice.
All right, so talking about Portugal, because they were first, and then Spain. Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, they finally got rid of the Muslims in 1492, and this is when Christopher Columbus also comes to them after Christopher Columbus is actually Italian. And he's trying to get backing for his adventure in Italy. Nobody listens to him. He goes to Portugal. Nobody listens to him. He finally goes to Spain. He's like, guys, seriously, I have this great idea for how to get spices. And Ferdinand and Isabella are like, well, Portugal's already sailing around. We should probably back this guy. So he sails, and he sails to the west. Have to orient myself here because he thought that he would be able to reach Asia that way. He had no idea that there was North and South America there. He starts sailing around, and as we know, he ends up in the Caribbean, and he at first doesn't realize he's found a new world, and that's why today he called those people Indians, and today that name is kind of stuck.
There you go. Now we get to Ferdinand Magellan, and this guy is the first one to what they call circumnavigate, or sail all the way around the world. All right, and he gets credit for it. He dies along the way, anyways, and doesn't even make it back. All right, but it is him and his 3 ships, I believe.
Yes, 3 ships. Only one makes it back with only 18 people at the end.
I mean, there was like mutinies along the way. He was fighting with natives in the Philippines, and that's where he dies. But it's so important because it kind of gives everybody an idea of actually what the scope of the earth is, how big the oceans are, and kind of puts the world into perspective and focus for Europe.
That's Magellan on the left, and then the bottom picture is his voyage. And as you can see there, he died in the Philippines because he actually tried to meddle in some affairs there, and then they killed him. But the rest of his crew makes it finally back to Spain 3 years later.
Um, um, Now, so Spain and Portugal are leading the way here, and the kind of ease the fighting. And it's kind of funny because the point does Spain or Portugal own any of the earth outside of their own country, but they decide to, you know what? You take this side of the world, we'll take this side of the world,
The
and
Pope actually had to intervene and say, "Hey, Portugal, you get this. Spain, you get this."
the reason why Spain and Portugal will listen to the Pope is because they are so devoutly Catholic. And as a result, all of those Jesuit uh, priests that we've been learning about in the Reformation and the Catholic Reformation are now getting set to go out and try to convert people in Asia and in the New World in the Americas. And so they are like pumped up that they get to go and do this.
All right, so it's not just Spain and Portugal who goes out and explores the land. We've got England with Henry VIII, which, if you're in my fourth hour, you know how much I love Henry VIII. He sent out this guy named John Cabot who tried to find the Northwest Passage, which I know you guys probably heard about. And he sailed out and actually found Newfoundland, which, if you look at, literally means new found land. Then we have Jacques Cartier, who sailed for the French and explored the St. Lawrence River. And then we have Henry Hudson, who sailed for the Dutch, and he found the Hudson River. Go figure. Wow.
Imagine
Hudson found
that.
Hudson.
Look at that.
So these are John Cabot and Hudson, and also a map of kind of all the different areas explored in Canada and North America by these people.
You have to remember that like, this is, look at all of this exploration is all done through waterways because the terrain was so harsh, there were natives, and it was just a very dangerous thing to try getting there through everything. So water was the best way to do it.
Now, we come into these two different East India companies. So we have first the Dutch East India Company, and it's called the East India Company because they're going out to India and Southwest Asia, and they're in the Spice Islands out there, and they're trying to get all the spices out there. So the Portuguese start to eventually decline in India and the Indonesia, and the Dutch come in. And the Dutch East India Company, well, they are literally a company full of wealthy merchants who form together, build ships, and go out and get spices and bring them back to not Dutch, what am I? Denmark and everything.
And
That's
Europe.
what I was
And
blanking
that's
on.
like it's a crazy thing, but like and then the VOC up there, that's what the Dutch East India Company, I don't know in Dutch, whatever how it worked out, but VOC is what you might see for the Dutch East India Company. And like if they came back, let's say they spent $1,000 on spices in India, they paid for $1,000, brought back a shipload. When that got back to Europe, that shipment of $1,000 worth of spices would be marked up to like $100,000. So this profit was huge over what was going on there.
These merchants got super rich.
And so it's not the actual Dutch or the British government. These are companies. So think of like Ford Motor Company going over and setting up shop and doing this. They would just have the backing of their countries, but it's still a company.
So the British also do this, and they're exactly like the Dutch, just wealthy merchants coming together, and they sail off to India. And if you guys know, later down in the road, the British actually take over India and colonize India, and this is how they started doing that.
So now we get to China, and we see Europe is, obviously trying to force its way in everywhere, and they try getting in there as well to trade. Remember, the Ming don't want anything to do with anybody. Stay out of here. The only thing they want is silver. Bring us metals into a port. We'll trade with you what you want. Heck out of here. And this guy, this Jesuit Christian named Matteo Ricci, he went and was trying to convert as many Chinese to Christianity as he could, but it didn't go well.
No, people were fascinated by his learning, but actually didn't really want to. This is just a picture of Matteo Ricci, and also the small little ports that China allowed Portugal and then eventually Great Britain to have. And then in the early 1600s, the Ming collapsed and they're overrun by the Manchu people who established the Qin dynasty. And these people think that they are better than everyone else, and they close off China, and China stays closed until like the late 1800s when the British and eventually us, the Americans, start coming in and saying, hey, China, you need to open your doors.
And it's not going to be done very nicely.
No. And the same thing kind of happens in Japan. At first, the Portuguese come in, they bring gunpowder, and the Japanese are like, wow, you guys are so cool. And then eventually the Japanese, that Tokugawa shogun, starts closing up Japan, and they're like, hey, like, we'll just give you one port, come in, drop your goods off, and then leave.
And it's then, so not until like the 1850s, 1870s does the U.S. Bring their gunships in and force Japan to open up to trade and all of that. But for like 200 years, they shut themselves off as well from the rest of the world. So that is it. Thanks for hanging out with us.
All right. We'll see you later, guys.
Later, Gators.
Bye.
Still here. It's awkward.